welcome back to the mixtape of life that is the Made You a Mixtape podcast. My name is Jason, I'm your host, and with me today is probably the hardest rocking smart person that I possibly know, Professor Steve Joordens. And Steve, I'm going to let you introduce what it is you do for a living.
Which part?
The everything of it.
The everything part. Yeah. So, I mean, my main gig is professor of psychology, University of Toronto, Scarborough. I like to teach really large classes. It's that performance kind of thing, I think. And as a result of that, I also got into educational technologies to try to figure out how I could teach these large classes, but in really deep, meaningful ways. And so my research is all about building educational technologies. And I actually have a startup around that as well. And as of course, you know, there's the band, there's motorcycles, there's all kinds of other fun things as well. But those are the two main gigs that keep me busy.
For the listeners of the podcast, little, inside baseball here. Steve and I are both in a band together. The band is known as the Freakin' Lolas. And you can still see our first video single out on YouTube. So I'll be sure to put a link to that into the podcast there. Now, Steve also specializes in memory. Now, how did that come about?
How did that? Well, I mean, that was really when I was in grad school. That was what my supervisors were interested in. So I dug into that and find it really. They often joke that psychologists study what they're most efficient in, and for me, memory was probably what I'm most efficient in. I don't trust my memory, but yeah, I found it fascinating to try to think how we understand things, and maybe we'll talk about the connection of music and memory a little bit as we go through. And so that's what I did a lot of my early research on. And it's still, I mean, to some extent now I would say I study learning, but learning is memory, learning is memory coming through in a different way. So it's just always an issue I found fascinating and a lot of fun to do research on.
As anyone who has completely blanked out on a test, guilty. Yes, there's a whole lot of memory in that. You mentioned that you deal with a lot of students in your class. How is it connecting with a class of that size?
Yeah, I mean, the fascinating thing is, and this is one of the things I spend a lot of time, is there our competition now, especially given it's mostly online, are social media, YouTube, blah, blah, blah. They're looking at the exact same device when we're teaching as can distract them in 50 million ways. And so, I'm a firm believer that those are the competition and we have to compete. We can't just sit here and do things in the old way. So for example, I don't do 1 hour lectures when I'm doing online teaching. I do 10 to 15 minute lectures, break things into quicker little chunks. I try to keep things moving as you do in a lot of video kind of things. So you make sure you have so-called pattern interrupts every now and then that bring the mind back and make people go, what's going on in here now and then? And so it really is, for me, engagement is the front door of learning. You have to have their mind, so you make it. I have a categorization scheme I call RIFs. You'll see music come all the way through this, RIFS, which is it's got to be either relevant to the student, interesting. You can make it interesting by piquing their curiosity or something. Fun, if you can make it fun, that's going to keep them there, or social. And social is the real challenge. How, especially in an online world, especially with a large class, can you get students interacting with each other in meaningful ways and making it feel like there's other people here. I'm learning. I'm part of a learning community. And so we use a lot of technology for that. And one of them is my baby, Peer Scholar, which is a technology where students put forward some idea, but then they all give each other feedback on how their idea can be improved. And then they learn from the feedback they receive and actually improve that. And so it feels to them like they're working with a group of students who are all trying to help each other. And that's a very powerful sort of social component of the learning that I think is key. They really want to feel like there's other human beings here and we're all care about each other. And so I try to create and foster that as much as I can in the classes.
When you have a class size, of what you deal with, whether it's in person or even virtually, and even through Peer Scholar, obviously we as people are almost pre-programmed, it feels like, to kind of join into cliques. Do you see that happening? And do you see, certain traits with the certain cliques, even if it's through something like Peer Scholar?
Yeah, I mean the closest I see that, and it frustrates me. It's fun. I mean, teaching's a fun thing because you run head to head into psychology while you're trying to break certain habits. And so, for example, I'll allow group work, and with some of these technologies, students can just sign up for groups. But literally, there may be 400 groups that are available initially, and once four people sign, those groups disappear. And so I suddenly say it's open, and students attack. And suddenly they find, oh, I didn't get in a group with my friends. I tried to get in a group with my friends, but by the time I got there, the group was full or whatever. And I will say, well, why do you want to be in a group with your friends? The idea of group work is to get stuck in a room with a bunch of people you don't know, and to figure out how to interact with these people effectively. And that's where the human skills, the communication skills come in, representing yourself well, listening to other people and interacting with them respectfully. It's not about hanging with your friends. That's easy. It's about hanging with people you don't even know and maybe don't even like, but you want to accomplish something together. It's kind of like our band. No.
Well, we were supposed to like each other?
Yeah. But I mean, it is. I mean, when you think of the band, situation, that sometimes that's the interesting one when you have this new member of a band, and will that new member sort of fit? Will they find a way to become a band, not just some sort of echo of a previous band? And those are the skills we want. But you will see students, naturally going with the familiar, and the familiar is their friends. That's what's comfortable. And often, even in like in teaching practices, they'll like lectures and multiple choice tests, even though that's a horrible educational experience. Generally, there's so many things to work with the information that gets it deeper. You know that from your teaching, so your students are constantly working with what they're learning. But for students, that they know how to do readings and multiple choice tests, and so they think that's fine, and they're comfortable with it. And when you say, no, I'm going to make you do this weird thing because you're going to really learn something from it, they'll have this sort of like, I don't like weird things. But that's part of the whole process for me, is explaining to them, here's why I'm asking you to do this weird thing. There's a reason, there's data behind it. Here's how I think it'll benefit you down the road, give you more success in life. And so, I do feel like you have to sell it a little bit. You need to get that buy-in. You need to show you know what you're talking about. And then students will resonate with that. And if they think you care about them and their future success, if you can, convince them of that, it's amazing how far they will suddenly bend and be willing to try these unfamiliar things.
It's funny you mentioned the whole, they want to work with their friends and they want to, it's be in that more comfortable situation. Do you ever just switch up the groups and say, okay, no, you're not working with them, you're working with them? And when you do that, do you find you get the better projects from the groups of friends that, stick together and, ride or die together, or the group that really doesn't know each other but draws on each other's different experiences to come up with a communal idea?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great research project. It'd be fantastic. The latter is obviously what we hope for, and I think friendship does get in the way of that. But the interesting thing is that when we're all in the workforce life, we quickly learn that nothing of value is done by one person. It's always a group. But in schools, the first time they have to do that group work, it's hard. We forgot how hard it was to be in a room of 3 or 4 strangers, or even a virtual room of 3 or 4 strangers, and to try to get those first sort of interactions going where you're starting to feel comfortable enough to share ideas and such. And a lot of these students are socially anxious to begin with because they've lived on their cell phones and they haven't sort of been in playgrounds, interacting in more human ways. So for some of them, it is a real serious challenge. But that's why they need to do it. And so I certainly don't pander to being in groups with friends. I try to create situations where that doesn't pan out for them. And when it doesn't pan out, I just go, oh, well, that's the whole purpose of this in the first place. It's hard to make sure it doesn't pan out because they're pretty sneaky. If they want to get their way, you can't always control them. But I honestly think your presumption is correct, that if we had, 4 good people, let's say 4 good students, but they were already pre-existing friends, or they weren't, and they were working together, I think the lack of a friendship would do the project good. I think the friendship gets certain roles or expectations in place, that get hard to kind of overcome. So if somebody's the talker in your social group, you'd let them talk here, even if you have a really great idea. You might allow that person to dominate. So I think you're right. We should do a research project, Jay.
Definitely just put them in a room and just start recording and start taking the notes. When it comes to you, and you did mention the analogy of a band as well.
Mhm.
You see bands that they grew up together, they were kids in a band together, and then they get to be in that band, they start doing a few albums, and then being together for so long, like
Yeah.
you have two sides. You have the bands that grew up together and then drifted way apart, and then you have the rare occurrences. I was about to say the Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, the Rush model, where
Yeah.
somehow it works. How hard is it for a group of friends to work together for that long and stay
Yeah.
civil to each other in a sense?
I think almost some of us are getting a taste of that during COVID with our home life in the following sense. So if we draw the analogy, I sometimes joke and say, a band is like a marriage between four people, and we all know how tough a marriage between two people can be sometimes. You've got all these dynamics of relationships and personalities to kind of negotiate. But with the COVID thing, what I'm kind of alluding to is when a band is on the road, and I wish I'd had this full experience. I'm talking more from watching other bands here, but it is kind of COVID like in the sense that these four people are stuck together in a very close way, and everybody else is sort of on the outside. And so for a long period of time, they are really in close proximity to each other. And if you add into things like exhaustion and stress and poor sleep, because bands are often traveling time zones or sleeping in negative ways, and so you get a little bit of that anxiety and a little bit of that weariness in there, and you expect clashes, you expect some sort of disagreements to occur. And so then I think the question is the band configured in such a way that it can survive these clashes? And so you could have some situations where there's just a leader and everyone does what they say anyway, and they don't have to like them because they know that good music will result and they'll get to go on tour, and that's what they want. But there's other bands that are much more, well, we have Metallica getting a psychologist in to hang around with them to work through their issues. It's tricky. I mean, bands are fun for that reason, because it's this coming together of different people to do something they all love. But it does require that sort of social interaction, depending on your group mates. And I'll just say, by the way, Jay, you know this, but you're about the lowest maintenance bass player around, which is a big deal. Bands need some people that are willing to come and play, and they don't have a whole lot of ego or whatever on the line. They just want to have a good time. And I think those people are critical in bands, because you have those people that have the ego that want it their way. So too many of those in one band and you got trouble.
And one of the things that I've always, with my bass playing and just what it is I like to play music,
Yeah.
full stop. And you have a lot of musicians that are very, like, guardians of the genre, guardians of their personal taste. I I'm not playing funk, I'm not playing dance. How important is an open mind to different types of music to
Yeah.
being in a band?
Yeah. So there's a term that's out there that I really like, which is having big ears, they call it, and the classic band people sometimes refer to as the Clash. Clash being a punk band, and you kind of think of punk bands as just straight driven power chords, pretty 4/4 on the floor kind of thing. But the Clash were known for being very open minded and listening to all sorts of music, and hear the world rhythms. Like it's punk, but if you go under the surface, there's some reggae under that punk, or there's some Afro beats going on here and there, and they are known for that, and it makes their music different from typical punk. It gives it's like the spice. You've got the basic core food there, that core flavor of the music, but then all of those other influences make it something really unique and interesting. And so I think every band should have big ears, and then that's how you learn as a band too. You go into some genre that you're not comfortable with. Funk playing is a little bit different, and maybe what you end up doing, I like this a lot myself, you don't play it right. So you say, I'm going to bring in some funk into whatever, and you don't play it right. And what ends up is you get your own style of funk, kind of like, the Rolling Stones didn't play blues right. they knew they couldn't play blues right. They said, we're not as expressive, we're not as soulful as those real blues players. So what we'll do is we'll play faster, and then no one will notice that with the feel isn't quite the same because it'll be up tempo, and that kind of brought rock and roll to the fore, right? And so you get a sound now of you hearing stuff, bringing it in imperfectly, and because of that imperfection, it becomes your sound, which is really interesting. So I think, if especially too, if you're going to do stay together over time, it's like a relationship, right? You need something new, you need something interesting. You can't just be doing the same thing over and over again. And that's where the big ears, I think, are your guide. What grabs you and what would be kind of cool to bring into your music and make it interesting.
And then there's also the fear, and I'm sure some bands have this fear, where their fans are so accustomed to the band sounding a certain way. This is my Metallica. This is my Foo Fighters. And then if a band starts to you know get adventuresome and mess with different genres, and they start listening to different things, which in turn affects the output that they're putting album to album. How does that fear come into play, as far as your audience wants this, but
Yeah.
you want to try this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I'd love to talk again from a ton of experience of having this loyal following. They're going to be disappointed. We're not quite there yet. But when I hear musicians talk, I admire the ones that aren't even worried about any of that kind of stuff. That are just literally saying, "Where am I at? My music is a vehicle for me to express myself, and I'm not who I was 10 years ago. And so you shouldn't expect the way I express myself to sound like it did 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. Things will change with me." And so people for whom music is just their vocal cord, it's just how they get stuff out. It will evolve and it will change, and they're going to lose fans and they're going to gain fans. And I think to the best musicians, almost it's their music they're worried about. They want to create stuff they love and they appreciate. And I can imagine someone like a Neil Young who can go from being a country artist on one thing to playing the grunge before the grunge on other things, and he seems to feel the need to kind of do that. And from his perspective, if his fans don't like it, well, listen to the stuff you like. If I made something you liked and that's all you like, listen to that. Meanwhile, I'm going to be doing this because this is where my head is right now. So I think that's about, are you trying to manipulate the game for sort of popularity, or are you following your heart? And I think if you're following your heart, and especially as a band, because four people are going to pull each other different ways as they go, and I think the music should be the natural evolution of that push and pull. It should be just what emerges, and it shouldn't be like, oh, this is what we want to emerge. No, let's just start playing and pull this thing five different directions, and whatever that song is, well, that's how it got born. That's what it is, and let's just accept it at face value and appreciate it.
As a music listener,
Yeah.
what is it about a song that grabs you? Is it the riff? Is it the lyric? Is it the overall feel? What is it about songs that hook you immediately?
When I was younger and really interested in music, that would have been an easy answer for you, which is the words. And for example, one of my favorite bands was Rush, because Rush had some of the most non-conventional lyrics of any rock band. They were talking Tolkien-esque fantasy stuff. They were, had all sorts of weird intellectual hints in that, and I wasn't quite sure what they were talking about. Genesis was another favorite of mine, so I would listen to The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway with headphones to this crazy story Peter Gabriel's telling, and I'm trying to understand what he's saying. So when I was young, it was all the word. I didn't even know when people said Rush was a progressive rock band. I was like, well, why are you calling them that? Oh, because of their time shifts and signature. Like, what the hell is that? I don't even know what that is. And then I grew up over time to realize, wow, they're really good musicians. And I almost didn't care. It was the words they were telling. Over time, and an interesting distinction started when I started playing music, which, as you know, was pretty late in my life, more around 40 years old. And I still liked all this progressive rock, this complex music. But then we would start playing Wild Thing, 4 chords, and people would light up. And some of that, and my old love of bands like the Kinks, would teach me things like sometimes simplicity has a beauty, especially in live music, that is to be appreciated, and a good basic song that really says something or makes some point. And so I point to maybe the Kinks catalog here. You can almost go with anything like "Well Respected Man" of the Kinks. It sounds like a silly little song until you really listen to the words, and then you realize, holy crap, he's kind of talking about these people that are going through life with a facade on, and there's a lot deeper meaning to this song than it looks like, but it sounds just sort of bubbly and happy. And as you go through, and for live music, I've come to like simple. I've come to like four chords, six chords, something like that. But behind the scenes, I still got my prog rock hat on, so all over the place, and different things like Red Hot Chili, or sorry, I didn't mean Red Hot. Squirrel Nut Zippers, which is a New Orleans jazz kind of band. I hear that for the first time. It's like, I've never quite heard anything quite like that. That's got me. I'm right there now. A current band I'll mention, My Son the Hurricane, which is an Ontario-based band. It's got this really cool hip hop guy in front of this huge horn section, and again, it was like this weird mix of a sort of New Orleans jazz with this a sort of strong, powerful hip hop singer, and that was enough. Again, high energy. I've never seen this before, and that'll grab me every time. I like to watch those things that are different, original in some way.
It's been a long time since bands have been able to get out there and gig regularly, and for some, they may not have even touched their instruments in months, or maybe by the time they actually get back to playing live shows, a year. How weird is it going to be, or how much of a hurdle is it going to be for some of these bands to even remember some of the songs they used to play when it comes time to getting out and playing live?
So go back to my memory hat now. It turns out, we talk about ourselves like we have a memory, like it's a singular noun. We actually have multiple different memory systems that help us with different things. And one of the big distinctions is our memory for information, things we know, versus our memory for skills, things we know how to do. And those skills are much more procedural memory, or what we colloquially call motor memory. And so for a lot of bands, they would feel, if you did not touch your musical instrument for a year, you will feel like, I haven't got a clue what the heck this. And someone says, we're going to play this song, and you'll be filled. I've been there. Filled with terror. Like, I don't have a clue.
You just go full Ricky Bobby. I don't know what to do with my hands.
Yeah, no idea. But then, somebody kicks in those first couple beats, and that's enough to kind of, for our brain knows that. Our brain starts pushing our body around. And sometimes you can watch in literal amazement as your hands do the right things. And your brain doesn't know what the right things are to do, but your hands do. And so often, people will still describe themselves as being rusty. And I think a lot of people would feel that rustiness. So they're not in the pocket as well as they might be. They have more self-doubt than they might otherwise have. But by and large, probably 80% or 90% of the song is there. And they might run into pockets where they're like, oh, what the heck happens in that section? And so they may need a little bit of review. But they probably walk into the song thinking, I know none of it. And then they leave that song thinking, okay, there's about 10% I need to brush up, and I should play it 4 more times, and then I'll feel back in the pocket. But for a lot of them, that's all it'll take. You get out there, you do a gig or two, you'll be riding strong again. At least if you were a pretty good player previous to that. Yeah.
One of the things through all of this, I remember I woke up one morning, and it was like about 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and one of those, like, you open your eyes because, like, all of a sudden your brain is working, and I sat there, it's like, I no longer know how this song goes. A song I've been playing for over a decade live, and I've played hundreds of times, and I'm like, I don't know how this song goes. And yet, and you try to kind of piece it back together. And yet, if I'm at the grocery store and a song that I haven't heard in 20 years comes up on the speakers, I know every single word. How did the two, sudden loss of memory when you really think about it, and then perfect memory when you're not thinking about it, how are those two? How do they work in conjunction?
So let's do a few things with these and kind of get back to it. So first of all, music and memory, because I think this will fit your podcast, and I think I want to make this point sort of COVID like. There's a weird thing about music in terms of how it interacts with our memories. often certain songs are really important in our life for a period of time. They're hits, they're on the radio, we hear them everywhere, and blah, blah, blah. And then they go away, they're replaced by the new hits. And so we're constantly having these songs that get strongly associated with a given point in our life and then go away. Not much else in our life does that. Sort of is there big time for a while and then disappears. Because of that, we can have this powerful thing with music where we can play a song we haven't heard for a while and we're right back there because that's the only time it's really associated with or really strongly. So it brings us there. One of the things I've been telling people during COVID, and I also give mental health advice during COVID, another hat I wear, is, if you want to do something really nice for somebody if you could create them a mixtape, a playlist with songs that, if you know them well enough to know these songs are associated with positive memories, cool. If you don't know them that well, just pick songs that were popular when they were 15 to 20 years old, because that's when we're all sort of super music freaks anyway. Send them that playlist and it'll do a couple things. One, it'll show them you care, which is already a very positive mental health thing. Two, when they play it, it will transport them back to some of those times. So you'll basically give them a trip away from COVID. We're gonna we're gonna bring you back to a time when COVID didn't exist. And should they actually sing or dance or start getting into it at all, that releases positive endorphins in our body that makes us feel good. The very first psychology experiments in the 1890s were about how the tempo of a metronome affects our emotional state. And when the tempo gets higher, we start to feel more pleasant, happy emotions. And music just does that. Psychology has used that to manipulate emotion. So generally, there's sort of that power that music has. As far as your question, the really interesting thing is how memory is all about building chains of things together. And so that once you have a previous link of the chain, it sort of kicks off the next one. So when you're in the supermarket, you might not have thought of that song for a long, long time. But when those first few beats start to play, that's almost all it needs to start pushing and rebuilding the rest of that memory just as you get to it. And so it can be really powerful when you wake up in that morning. If you don't have those first few beats, if you don't have that thing that kind of gets your mind into the groove, and I'm now brought back to a few band practices we've had where every now and then I have to start by doing some pattern, and every now and then I don't have that pattern in my head. And when it's like, oh, how does this little tempo of this thing go? If you don't have that first step, it can feel like you don't have any of it. Once you get that first step, it just kicks off the rest. So, it's that it can give us these experiences of feeling like we don't know anything. A very famous memory guy named Hermann von Ebbinghaus, he was the first to study forgetting. And his big result was we don't really forget. We just feel like we forget. So when you take that calculus exam and you step out and feel like it's gone, I don't remember a thing I learned. It may feel like that. A month later, it may feel like you don't remember a thing about calculus. But if you have to take calculus again, you'll relearn it really quickly. It's there. It's just sort of under the covers, and all you need to do is a little bit more work to bring it back to the fore. So that's what'll be going on with a lot of musicians when they start playing again. It'll feel like they'll feel very low confidence. I don't know how to do this stuff. But then as they start doing it, they'll very quickly feel like, oh, no, I'm all good. I'm back again.
It's often said that when musicians play together and everything is clicking, they're on the same wavelength. It's kind of a group think process. How does that work? How does that wavelength become shared within a band?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sometimes wish I was a more skilled musician than I am when I answer some of these questions, because I can talk about a continuum and I don't feel like I feel like I'm still early on that continuum. But I know that with music, and in fact with a lot of creative collaborative activities, there's this tendency of people just to be focused on their own contribution and what they're doing and trying to do their bit well. And when you got four people in a band that are there, you can have four good musicians that don't sound good together. They're all doing their part well, but they're not doing it together in the right way. So a really critical step in a lot of relationships, band and otherwise, is when people start really engaging in what we call active listening. realizing that for any communication among individuals to work, you can't just speak. You have to every now and then really focus on listening to what other people are saying. And so that could be, your spouse, if it's a relationship, every now and then taking time of just saying, I don't want to express what's on my mind. I want to understand what's on yours. And I want a really good feeling. That's a very powerful thing to do, by the way. It really makes people feel cared for and respected when you do that. But similarly in a band, I mean, you got to get in this weird situation in a band where you have to be able to play and listen at the same time, which you don't really do in a relation. We don't talk and listen at the same time. But in a band, you have to get your playing to a point where it's almost automatic. And this is where I say, I feel like I'm just sort of on that edge right now. But when people get their playing well, then they can listen to others. And especially for us guitar players, it's listening to the drums and the bass, listening to the rhythm and really feeling like where they are, where is that number one, and what kind of interesting little embellishments are there, and maybe I should be playing my riff a little differently, or maybe I should be accenting certain parts of it to really accent what they're accenting. And that's when it really starts to feel like a tight band, where you go, oh yeah. So a tight band, they're all listening to each other quite well, and often that starts with a drummer that's providing very clear signals that everyone can listen to and build off of as well.
And the funny thing is, you have bands that occasionally they need to swap out a member, especially cover bands that are playing in your local bar. The guitarist can't play this weekend, so we brought in a sub. When you have that dynamic where a band has played together for a number of years and they're familiar with each other, and then for whatever reason someone's got to sub out or sub in for a gig, what's the dynamic like for the ones that are missing that piece, and what's the dynamic like for someone who is all of a sudden now needs to jump into this group think?
Yeah. And of course, it depends on who swapped out and who swapped in. And what I mean by that a little bit is, you can look at something as specific as complexity of playing. Are they a busy player, or are they a fairly sparse player? And if you're swapping somebody in, you'd probably rather sparse in a sparse player. Swap in somebody who's not going to try to do too much, who is going to listen a whole lot and kind of embellish. And once someone's really played with you for a while, that's when you can learn how to be more busy, but appropriately busy, because it's almost like you need the groove first. And then any busyness you do is sort of, icing on top of the groove. But if somebody is coming in and trying to be busy, and they don't know you and they haven't listened to you well and how you play the songs, they're going to be annoying. They're just going to be somebody who's trying too hard or feels like they're trying to do too much. And so I think that's the key is somebody who, if you're swapping in, not trying to be too dominant, not trying to be certainly a show off. I mean, if anything, you would like the other three to feel really good about their performance, assuming a four piece, the other three to feel really good about their performance. That would be more important to you than them feeling good about your performance. You want them to feel like, oh, I had a great night. And then they're going to say, I enjoyed playing with that person. Not because they were any good, because I had fun when I was playing with them. And they're more likely to do that if you are, doing the minimum you have to do to hold down the song well. And then figuring out your spots, beyond that. So, I think that's part of it. But there's also the relationship side, of course, and there's certain people and certain bands that just won't swap somebody out. They'll just say, this is our band, which is more an original band kind of thing, a cover band again. It's more means than end. But there are times when people just won't. Every person is the band, and if it's not those people, I won't. Aside from that, it sort of depends on the people and how cool they are with. I'm a person that doesn't generally want to work with other people that much, but then I'm hanging around with you guys who are working with other people all the time, and so suddenly it's like, okay, it feels like there's permission. If I wanted to, I could. And so I think all of those dynamics, again, a marriage of multiple people where you really have to figure out what are the boundaries, what are the trust levels. And anytime you bring somebody new and just drop them in, that is tricky. And yeah, I would be, if I were ever dropped in, I would be a minimalist. I think I would do the basic stuff and try to make the band happy.
Music is one of the very few things that can elicit almost the full spectrum of emotions depending on what you're actually listening to. What parts of the mind, what synapses is music triggering, or is it certain different types of music are triggering different synapses?
So, I mean, one place to start, music it hits so much of the brain at once, and the brain's a distributed processing system. So, we're not going to be able to say it's happening right here and this is what's going on. But generally, we all know this part of the story that the right side and the left side of our brain are not necessarily doing the same things. And when it comes to sound, the left side of our brain is very language focused. It's really all about knowing that language is really important to us as we're communicating now. We can share ideas. And literally, it's kind of said that half of the brain is going to have big chunks of it devoted just to processing and producing language. On the right side, the similar parts of the brain are more about rhythm and non-language sounds. So more what we think of as melodies and musical kind of things. So first of all, that is the right side of the brain, which is one of the bases of the right left. Usually the brain speaks to itself, so speaks to the two halves speak to each other so fluently that it doesn't really matter what's left and right. But certainly we know that a lot of rhythmic sounds and stuff are the right side of the brain, but they're also very connected to our limbic system. And the limbic system is that some people call it the reptilian brain, the most primitive part of our brain. It's where a lot of our emotional regulation happens, where a lot of it stems from, our emotions in general. And music has a strong effect on that in a much more global. So I told you that very simple phenomenon of just making a metronome go faster makes people report, if you ask them their emotional state, they report more positive emotional states with a quicker metronome. So that's just, a reduction of music down to clicks. Now imagine you're adding, the aggression of an electric guitar or a chime of a bell or a violin, which is a very different, long drawn out violin notes. They all kind of induce emotions in us in different ways. Some of it through associations. We may have seen violin music associated with various, maybe it brings to mind Schindler's List, for example. And if it brings to mind Schindler's List, very strong violin music in that, then it may bring with it feelings of sorrow or the kinds of things you associated if you watch that movie. So all of these sounds have associations with us. Most of us who love rock love it because it's energizing. It gives us a feeling of strength, power, and everybody likes that feeling. And so that's why rock sort of figured out. But then you have things like blues, right, which is slow rock. It's rock you have to play with a lot of feeling, and it literally, the blues players were, their sort of touchstone was the human voice, and I want my guitar to sound like a human voice that's maybe crying or moaning or making these sounds that complement the story I'm telling you. And so it was really about being very expressive with that instrument, hence the slower playing that allows you to really bring that out. And blues is kind of like having fun being sad. And when you think about what that's about, but a bunch of people will go together to feel sad together and hear sad stories because there's something very cathartic about knowing that other people are having really tough life experiences as well. And so we get to share each other's pain, and that makes us all feel better. So that's the sort of complex level at which music can hit us, from down to just the beat, to associations, to the whole sort of spirit or idea of what that song is meant to kind of convey.
So in essence, if you're having a bad day, listen to Tool, because they're having it worse no matter what.
Probably. And there's times I used to listen to a lot of Pink Floyd, which would bring me down. It would make me very pensive and thoughtful, and sometimes scared. Racing away, the moments that make up a dull day. It's a song all about doing nothing while life is passing you by, and that song scared the crap out of me. I would listen to that and go, I don't want to be that guy. 10 years have passed me by and I haven't done anything. No one told me when to run. So that's even a case where music can sometimes have an effect on us now, an emotional effect on us now. But sometimes I like it because of it shapes my life. It really gets me thinking about things in different ways and affecting how I live, I think. And so that's a very deep, almost transcendental kind of level that music can hit for some of us, that I think is just really critical to our just tolerating existence, which can be tough. And music is one of those things we can all point to. Music, art, as things that give us beauty and give us enjoyment in a life that can give us a lot of crap too. So yeah.
So being a psychology professor, the impression one might get is that you're a very cerebral person, but you also rock out pretty hard. What what was it that encouraged you or sparked your fascination with wanting to play live music?
So fun. It's such a weird, funny story in a way. Like, where do we start? So, when I was young, I loved listening to music. I never really fantasized about playing it. Me and some of my friends won Triumph's Rock Star for a Day. They had this contest and they came through Fredericton, and we won. And part of what you won was an electric guitar. And so four of us won this electric guitar at the time. And at that time, we decided who was going to get the guitar. They gave some money to the restaurant, and I bought a cheap guitar. So that was the first time I thought maybe I'll try learning. And then I realized it's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. It's hard. And so that guitar.
That's why I play bass.
Yeah. So that guitar sat in the closet for a long, long time. And literally, I think I'd completely given up, and not given up. It's not even like it was a dream. I just wasn't really in my world until we had a dog that was very sick. We used to travel, we used to scuba dive, and we just decided not to do that for a while. And we knew it was going to be probably a year or more that we wouldn't be able to travel. And so my wife bought us Hal Leonard, How to Play Guitar. We had a couple things sitting around and we started playing. And one of these books that I still have, after a first chapter, it said, "You now know 3 chords. It's time for you to get a band." And I was like, really? Yeah, time to get a band. That's the only way you'll progress. And we just happened to have a friend that was a great guitar player. I was playing bass then at the time as well, and another one that was a good drummer. And so my wife kind of took up the rhythm guitar duties, and I took up the bass duties. And we just started doing Wild Thing over and over again, and other taking care of business. Another good 4-chord song. And at some point, students heard and invited us out to a show, and we're like, serious? And so nothing was planned, nothing was driven. We sold out the first show ever, which we played 4 songs horribly with. I have the video still, but we sold it out. The students were really, really nice, and I think that was my taste of a little taste of rock star, coming and seeing a place sold out and the students singing and enjoying it. And so since then, I've come to the opinion that I want to be good. I want to be good at everything I do. And I believe that the only way to be good is to practice, and that the best practice is practice that lines well with what your goal is. So if my goal is to play out well, then I have to play out poorly at first. But you have to play out. You have to learn everything about playing out, what the pitfalls are. And if you do that enough, you'll get better and better and better. So we just started playing out and we started doing this stuff. I've got videos of almost everything. Some of them are absolutely horrific, but it is nice to kind of see that progress. And yes, it's especially with COVID now, we haven't been able to play. I mean, I enjoy having you guys over to the basement as much as anything. We haven't even been able to do that. So yeah, I don't know. It wasn't a classic draw. It wasn't that I dreamed of this all my life and I finally did it. But it was something that my wife and I could do together and really enjoy together, which we always we look for those things. And then we met people like you and Leo, the drummer, and you guys are probably, this is going to get mushy now, but you guys are my closest friends outside of those friends that I had from when I was 15 or 16. So I still know those people. But as far as since then, this has just been a really kind of therapeutic part of my life, I think, to play with the band and to constantly challenge myself to write songs and play better and perform better. And I'm never more nervous than when we perform. I can stand in front of 1,600 students and be perfectly fine. You put the guitar around my neck and put me in front of 16 students, and I will be nervous as heck.
One of the fascinating things about playing live as well, and I'm sure is that whole rush of the the connection between the band and the crowd. And there's always the old adage is, if the band's having fun on stage, the crowd's going to have fun, and vice versa. And of course, those first couple songs, it's very much like a weeding out process. At what point does it's a feeling out, right? With the crowd and the band's like, are we going to like them? And the band's up there going, are we going to get them? Right? At what point does that merge come together and everyone's having a good time?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's so nice when it does. I mean, I think we have been incredibly lucky because we have four characters in our band to some extent, and nobody's trying too hard to have a good time. Everybody just sort of does. So I think we are lucky in the sense that if the fans were not resonating with us, we would probably still have a good time, in front of a bar full of people looking the other way. We would just enjoy the experience. So I think that's half the battle. That when we're enjoying it, then we have a good chance of bringing them on board. Then there's of course playing the right songs, and so choosing those first couple songs is really important. Sneak in a twist and shout as soon as you can, or something like that. Something that you think is going to pull, one or two people up to the floor. And once you get those one or two people, there's if you haven't seen the first follower video on YouTube, I highly recommend it. But when you get that first follower, that second person that comes up and dances after the crazy person does, then you've pretty much got it. And then it's a question, I think, of just being true to what music is supposed to be about, which is it's not about the band, it's not about the people, it's about the party. And you have a role to play in the party, they have a role to play, the venue has a role to play, and you just got to know what your role is and not get too self-absorbed in that. I think it was ACDC early on that I kind of like. They said, well, when we thought about writing songs and performing songs, what it came down to, we realized, was beer sales at the bar. The bar didn't care how good or bad we were. Didn't matter at all. They would have us back every time if we sold a lot of beer. And so we wrote songs that would make people want to drink beer. So that's their approach to the success. And it worked pretty well for them. So I think a taste of that should be in the back of all of our minds, that it's about how much fun do those people have. And back to your issue of what music do you play, or do you get all fussy over what music you play? You play the music you think they want to hear, and if you do that, you're going to have a great time. If you're not having a great time and they are, there's something really weird about you.
And that has to be a hard hurdle to get to, not for a cover band per se, or for like an originals band that's just starting out. But when you think about, the opening act, you have an arena or a stadium full of people that came to see the band, and then the band, the band before the band has to come out. And in a lot of cases, it's like, well, we've never heard of you. Entertain us for 35 minutes. How daunting must that situation be, to be in front of, say, 20,000 people and everyone just kind of stares at you? You go, all right, play.
So I mean, I think as a psychologist, the trick would always be, in my mind, to turn lemon into lemonade. They don't know anything about us. They're expecting absolutely nothing. They think we're just this filler that'll get them maybe to what they want. If we can really blow them away, and especially like what so I would be thinking of that lead band. They should be worried about us. Our job is, yes, to warm up the crowd and get them ready, but also to push the edge of warming them up too much, where the band starts to say, whoa, who are those guys? And a classic, if you want a story of this, is the Red Hot Chili Peppers and some of the early bands and early jams in Los Angeles, where they were that cover band. Nobody knew who they were at all, but they came with so much energy and so much ferocity. I mean, when you got Flea playing bass, you got a pretty good advantage in the back line, that people suddenly didn't want them as an opening act, because they were too good. So I mean, I think that's the opportunity. You almost have nothing to lose as an opening act. You can go in there, and if you're just mediocre, no one will judge you, because they weren't there to see you anyway. They weren't expecting. But if you can turn it up a little bit, and if you can really kind of say, hey, these people weren't here to see us, like us, then you can go away and you sort of pat yourself on the back and say, fantastic. And then you can enjoy the main show yourself and have a great time. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the way I would try to see it, as an opportunity to win these people over.
I've always been fascinated to find out what the first album was that someone went out and bought with their own money. And the whole theory was like, I'm sure everyone's got, like, your parents buy you a cassette or a vinyl or a CD or whatever, that's one thing. But to actually take your own money, go to the record store, spend the money that you have in your pocket that you put there, that album has to mean something. So do you remember the first album you ever bought?
It's tricky. You're pushing me. So I did a lot of that. So I worked on a farm from when I was about 12 years old, and my main expenditure was albums. I was one of these guys with a whole room full of albums. So what did I buy first? That's tricky. I would guess it would, if I had to pick one of two, then this is more based on just how many times I've listened to them, which I'll assume means they're early. But it was either Rush's Hemispheres or it was Genesis's The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. I think those are the ones I really remember, and both of those, by the way, are concept albums, which was a thing I was into at the time. So I like to listen to a whole side. I didn't, I wasn't about individual songs at the time. I wanted a band to be saying something to me. So I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think of funny ones I bought too. I remember an ELO album I quite liked for a while, which would have been very different from anything else I was buying at the time. Electric Light Orchestra, they were just completely different. But I've been eclectic for a long time. The very first album, man, and I also went from pop things like Rod Stewart at the time, who was more poppy. I would buy sort of poppy things, and then I had a friend whose brother was interested in things like Brian Eno and Talking Heads and David Bowie and Roxy Music and all that sort of more artsy kind of FM radio stuff. And I love all that too. So what did I buy first? I don't think I could tell you, but if I had to pick one, I'd say Rush Hemispheres. Maybe it just seems late in the Rush canon, so I probably had earlier Rush before that. So that's why I'm just not sure.
And I love how you put in the fact that you like to listen to a full album, which is, when you think about how we consume music today, it's not how we consume music. It's we're very much about the song. Do you think the art of the full album is becoming lost in our current digital landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot. People our age will whine about this stuff all the time, but I think there's a lot that's lost. I mean, I watch some of these shows. There's a Canadian show where they have a song ready, and people come in and sing, and they're ultimately just going to pick the voice for the track, and they produce it all in 2 days, and they get it out there. And some of these are I forget the name of the show, but some of you have probably seen it. I'm fascinated by that because it shows you this sort of music production thing, but it also, the idea of this songwriter and this songwriter got together and did this, and then they went to these studio musicians who put together a backing track, and then they went to this famous producer who's going to find the voice and match the voice to. It just feels like these little bits and pieces, and I sometimes worry that the chemistry that comes from a band who really knows each other and really works together and does this push and pull can lead to things that are more unexpected and interesting than the sort of recipe book way we're doing it. We're probably a small group of people are producing a lot of the music that's on the radio now, and so we lose the Clash kind of influence where they bring in something really weird. So I do worry. I wish that there were more bands making albums that really mattered to them and that there was more support for people doing that. It just doesn't seem, it seems like the music industry can just shift every now and then, and it feels like musicians, they can either say, I'm going to do what I'm going to do no matter what, and just not be popular anymore. Think of all the 80s bands that had to sort of suck it up when the grunge scene hit. They were still great bands, but suddenly there was no interest for what they were doing. Well, do you continue to be Motley Crue and just continue being it and say, that's what I am, or do you try to play to the current tastes? And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I do carry some of that feeling like there was something lost when the Fleetwood Macs, even if you imagine a Fleetwood Mac where not only were they together all that, they had just huge internal issues of everybody sleeping with everyone's wife and blah, 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 blah. And they produced the album Rumors. When you listen to Rumors, you're like, oh, that is good songs that come from a very deep place and that say a lot. Would a songwriter write that? Just somebody sitting in Nashville coming up with that next thing, or are they looking more for the chorus? What's the chorus hook? Okay, now let me build a whole song around that chorus. I love this bar. Okay, I've got the chorus. I love this bar. Let me tell a story about a bar I love and just fill in all the stuff. It can create a song. I don't know if it'll create songs that stick. Like, I don't know if the 80s or 70s or 60s, a lot of those songs I think we'll listen to 20, 30 years from now. I'm not sure how many of the songs that are produced today we'll listen to, 40, 50 years from now. I could be wrong, but.
And the sad thing too is that when you think about the full album of some of those albums, I know me personally, some of my favorite songs from my favorite bands are the deep cuts. They're the ones that never got released as singles. And it's almost like you wish that you could go back to the days where there was, the front to back album where there was, no skips whatsoever. Like, do you remember the last front to back album you listened to where you were just like, I'm not hitting skip at all?
Well, yes, but that's because of a weird. So my wife and I, kind of, some of this too. We love to go back to New Brunswick. We love East Coast bands. We're kind of plugged into a lot of the East Coast music scene as audience members, as people that travel around on our motorbikes to music festivals, and we get to know these people, and they're producing albums. And every time we listen to their album, we listen to it front to back. And so there's a lot of. In fact, that reminds me, I'm going to put that on my playlist. Kill Chicago, a great Fredericton-based band, have two albums out, and I know every song on every one of their albums. So when I'm consuming new bands, that's how I like to consume them. I like to get the albums and do it. But when I'm consuming pop music, that's sort of the dual. So I have like the original bands that I seek out that almost nobody knows, but I love them, and that's all that matters to me. And then there's the pop music stuff, and with the pop music stuff, it's a different story. Then it's just the songs. And so I might even like, for example, 21 Pilots. I kind of like 21 Pilots, but when we listen to 21 Pilots, we just listen to the Essentials playlist. And so we get their 8 songs that we've heard on the radio. And so I have that side of me too. When a lot of modern bands, I'm more Arctic Monkeys, things like that. I'm more, give me the essentials, but the bands I really care about, it's got to be the album.
Before we get to like the big question of the podcast, you touched
Mhm.
on something, how you and your wife like to go, hop on your motorcycles, head out to a festival. We're coming out of hopefully eventually coming out of, the worst pandemic in over a century. And the concept of going to a concert, being in the crowd, being on the floor or in the pit or whatever, that's going to be a very, very, for some cathartic, for some traumatic experience. For the concert goer who's, you know afraid or looking forward to, that sense of normal, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I've since the pandemic started, I do a bunch of media interactions as well, and the question right from the outset is, what's going to be the hangover of this? Like, how will this change the way humans interact? How will it change the way they behave? And I've always thought there's sort of two forces at play. I now think I know which one's going to win, and I think it's going to clobber. Right? But one of the forces is that sort of worry that comes with, the fear of sickness, and we know this is something that is very deeply ingrained in psychology. If you drink or eat something and you become sick, you very quickly learn to dislike that thing you drank or ate. And so now we're walking around and we're worrying about other humans making us sick. And so the question is, would we quickly come to dislike being close to any human being? So there's one force like that. The other force is, right from birth, we need other human beings. We are incredibly social creatures. We get a lot of our warmth from other humans, especially in times of crisis. That's what's made this pandemic so horrible, is we can't get those hugs that we want. Often, we can't even see our grandchildren in some cases, and things like that. And so what do I think will win out? So I think the thing that really convinced me is in the Thanksgiving travel, when you look to the States and you saw all the airports full, and people would interview people and say, don't you know that it's dangerous? And they could tell you everything with their conscious, rational minds. Yes, I know. I could bring back the virus. I could blah, 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 blah. And then say, well, why are you doing this? And they'd say, I just haven't seen my mom or my dad or whoever for a long time. I just really, really need to see them. I don't know when I'll get to see them again. And what they're basically telling is, my emotional need to be around other human beings is stronger than my fear of a potential danger that could be associated with that. I think our human needs are going to win. And I've been now predicting what I call the great snapback, which is, as soon as we feel it's safe, I think as soon as we think that virus is gone, I think we're going to go running back to pre-pandemic. We're going to be there quickly. We may even, embrace. I think more of us will be in those music situations, saying, it's so great to be back. I've missed this so much. More than we'll be fearful. I think we need to know it's safe, but I think we're already slipping that way. We're already, even though it's very dangerous, perhaps more dangerous than it's ever been. Part of the problem is that people are like, I got to see people. I got to do stuff. It's been too long. And so I think the emotion, it always does, by the way, the emotional part of our brain always beats the conscious, rational part of our brain when in a head-to-head fight. And I think it will win this time too. So I think we'll go back to that.
So now that we're at the end of the podcast, I like to wrap everything up by just getting into, the mind of the guest. So to do that, here is the scenario.
Okay.
You're introducing yourself to a total stranger, but to do that, you're handing them a mixtape of songs that basically tell the story of you. So, what's on that mixtape and why is it there?
Okay, so this would be a messed up mixtape because I like albums and I like halves of albums. So I'm going to mention a few albums, sometimes have, sometimes not. But Rush in general, the Hemisphere. If I had to pick a Rush song, just as a kind of indicator, I think I would pick the song "Something for Nothing," which the core lyrics are: "You can't get something for nothing. You don't get freedom for free. You won't get wise with the sleep still in your eyes, no matter what your dreams may be." So these are in my subconscious, and that song told me early on, if you want stuff, you got to work for it. Things aren't just going to fall on your lap, and that's the kind of thing when I was a 12-year-old I was listening to, and I think it was very formative for me. So I'd pick Something for Nothing. Dark Side of the Moon. We talked about this a little bit. That song about wasting away the hours that make up a real day, and anyway, the sun going up behind you while you're doing nothing, and time's getting you by. So again, maybe a theme here, but but I felt this music thing saying it's up to you. So a lot of these, I've realized, by the way, Rush has some sort of right wing aspects to it that I wasn't aware of as a child, and so some of these kind of now I look at them and I go, oh yeah, okay, that's kind of interesting that I resonated so much with some of these things, but that's part of it. David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust, I would also throw as an album, which is a big thing to put on a mixtape, but it was super powerful to me. Bowie just gender bending was strange for me at that age. I was a New Brunswick boy, so I'd never seen anything like David Bowie. I liked, interestingly, we could put one of these on there too. I guess the Guess Who. So let's say American Woman, I might throw on there. But they also have a song called Glamour Boy, where it's Guess Who, Burton Cummings, basically attacking David Bowie for being as much about his image as about his music. And so the Glamour Boy was the look of, and I always saw that as the edge between old rock and roll, where you could be Bob Seger and it didn't matter. Well, I guess Bob Seger's a relatively attractive guy. I shouldn't say that, but he's just a hairy, singer or whatever. But that was where the glam movement started, and suddenly you had to be more than that to catch attention. Of course, MTV kind of picked that up a lot more. So I'd throw that. Red Hot Chili Peppers, almost anything you want from Red Hot Chili Peppers. I just love Flea. So that again, fusion, that energy of having a rock drummer with a sort of hip hoppy front man with a bass player that I don't even know how to categorize, and bringing those together with a really great guitar player, they're fantastic. I'll pick a deep cut, an odd story. I love everything Neil Young. And what does Neil Young say about me? I think it does, actually. Neil Young embraces low production quality. He embraces authenticity. So if you and he jam and it felt good to him, he will not allow you to clean anything up. Yeah, you could say, "Oh, that was really great, but let's redo this or let's redo that." It's like, no, man, that was it. That was cool. And so he's really big on one take, just do stuff. Let's not polish. Let's not have 8 layers. So it has to be real, but that's not just in the delivery. It's also in the lyrics. So the song I would pick, which is kind of an interesting one, is one he did after 9/11, and there was a concert, and there were a bunch of people doing music, and he came out and did a song called "What God Wants." I don't think many people know this song, but he just sat at a piano and he did it, and it was the most poignant, powerful song about sort of religious freedom and religious liberty at a time when there was a lot of paranoia, and it basically was, yeah, you'd have to hear the song, but it literally is one of those songs where I'd never heard it. He sat at the piano and I was just tingling the whole time he was singing it, like, holy crap, he's just nailing it. And it was just the authenticity of the expression and the simplicity of it. So I love that for him. So that's me. I'm simple and authentic. I think on my more recent life, I've mentioned a couple of these, but I'm going to highlight them again. I think I hope an important aspect of me is that I'm not just a classic rock guy, even though that's sort of where probably my home sort of lies musically. But I always like to be stretched and always like new things. I mentioned Squirrel Nut Zippers, New Orleans style. I'd really recommend them. Kill Chicago and Lester Slade. These are two East Coast band. Lester, I don't even know how to categorize them, but authentic again, real, and sort of comes from a place. This is why I like East Coast music. They grow up playing in kitchens, literally, these kitchen parties. And that's what they aspire to. They're not thinking, oh, I'm going to go on the tour. I'm going to do that. I mean, maybe they come to think that at some point when they form bands. But when they're learning music, it's because people are playing music in the kitchen and somebody hands them something. And they grow up sort of playing in that sort of vibe. And somehow the music seems more authentic to them too. They play it for the fun, that this is a cool song, this is a great song that we love to play, and that music feels less created the way we were talking earlier. It feels more authentic, that it comes from the right place. So yeah, check out Lester Slade. He's one of my favorites. And the final one I'll just mention to make that point again is My Son the Hurricane. I highly recommend. Yes, listen. But if you see them playing somewhere, go. They are just one of those bands where you cannot not have fun at a My Son the Hurricane show. He just so much energy, so much personality, so great performance, so bombastic. The horns and the music just blasting you as you go. I highly recommend them as a new band that we could all get behind for sure. So I guess that would be my mixtape.
Steve, thank you.
Other stuff if you want.
Steve, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Where can we find you on social if we want to hit you up and just toss you some cool songs to listen to? Yeah,
I'm mostly on LinkedIn, which I know is not the preferred social media, but it's sort of where all my personalities come together. So you can certainly find me on LinkedIn. I have a Facebook page. I have a Twitter account. I don't do a whole lot of other social media stuff. So those would be the places to track me down mostly. And look for Freaking Lolas. That's the name.
And if you take a look at the link for this on YouTube, I will make sure to put the link of our song on YouTube. So be sure to check that out as well. Steve, thank you so much. This has been the Made You a Mixtape podcast. I'm your host, Jason. If you're listening to us on YouTube, we're on all audio streaming services. If you're listening to us on an audio streaming service, guess what? We're also on YouTube. So be sure to follow, like, subscribe, and whatever you're listening to us on, thank you so much for coming out. We'll see you next time.